This is ogforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention three things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Paya. Paya offers Acumatica users a suite of industry-leading payment orchestration tools. Far beyond native Acumatica payments, Paya enables EMV NFC terminals for countersale. They offer a frictionless customer portal through their click-to-pay solution, and they support most e-commerce platforms and point-of-sale solutions used with Acumatica, such as One Retail and POS. And best of all, omni-channel reconciliation is available for all their solutions. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is Aldrich Web Solutions. Are you a distributor using Acumatica, yet struggling with an e-commerce fit? US-based Aldrich Web Solutions out of Marion, Illinois, has 2 decades of experience helping distributors find success online. Our team of experts built the integration, creating websites that work effortlessly with Acumatica. With our reputation for swift customer service and meticulous attention to detail, we are the perfect fit for distributors needing online solutions. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. I mean guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Friday, September 6th, 2024, and this is episode number 138. You can find related links on the episode page at augforums.com/episode 138. Today I'm talking with Brooke Petty about the Entrepreneurial Operating System, known by its acronym as EOS. This is the third episode in a row where we've done EOS. It just kind of all came together, so it's cool to get different angles. And Brooke, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Well, before we dive into EOS, I always like to talk about the brief origin story of all of our guests. Maybe you can tell us where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you got involved with mid-market ERP systems.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in South Carolina called Gaffney, South Carolina. And that's why I'm wondering if you're going to need an interpreter for this accent for your podcast. And so I grew up there.
I understand you just fine. No problem.
And so I grew up there and enjoyed life there, and went to high school and all of that, and then ended up going to Clemson University, go Tigers, and found lifelong friendships there. Was in the business program at Clemson, and came out of there and went into really ministry settings for about 15 to 18 years. And then I tell people that I went from ministry to wastewater. And so it was quite a change. And so, but the beauty of the company that we work for in wastewater, we do business as a ministry, and so it's exciting to see how that's kind of relayed over into Operators Unlimited, where I'm working today. And that really, Operators Unlimited, I've been there about 6 years, and that's really where I have been most ingrained into the ERP world with Acumatica.
So that's Acumatica was your first foray into mid-market ERP with Operators
Yeah, that's
Unlimited.
right.
Okay, okay. Oh, I didn't realize that. Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so
it was kind of
I
the
mean,
beginning for me.
we've done some work together in the past few years on like some reporting stuff, and you guys had brought up EOS. You had mentioned it, I think, at one point, and then I've heard it from a few other people in the Acumatica community, and I think it's interesting. This, yeah, but I'd love to know how many people are running on both. But there seems to be some good synergies there, I think.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it from what you've shared, and just from the interaction that we've had with EOS, we've found it to be really really insightful for us and really bringing some uniformity to our team. So that's been wonderful.
And I want to talk to you about your journey at Operators Unlimited a little bit more first. But before I do, I definitely want to point out you are definitely not the first person from the South who has sort of like self-consciously pointed out their accent, and I think it's interesting. I feel like I don't know, maybe people with a Southern accent think they're inferior or something. I don't know, but you're definitely not the first person who said that to me, and I think it's interesting. There's some cultural thing in the U.S. where there's I don't know, and then it's also interesting to me because my kids watch a bunch of YouTube, and there's this I think there's this interesting phenomenon going on where YouTube's like killing accents because everyone's listening to the same style of accent, and there's almost like this YouTube accent, and so. Anyways, the cultural distinctions are, I think YouTube is sort of wiping them out a little bit, but interesting comments on accents I wanted to
Yeah.
make.
Well, I'll
Nothing more
tell
than
you,
that.
mine is strong, and there's no changing it. And I there and I don't even want to, but I have to let people know that sometimes you have to interpret, especially if things come out that are very Gaffneyisms from where I'm from. So
Well, I'll ask you if there's any isms that I don't get. I'll ask you. But I always
okay.
like pointing out because like I tell me if I'm going too far with this, but one thing I read from like someone with a southern accent who sort of points out self-consciously is like I feel like there's almost this mindset that you can't have a southern accent and be smart.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't know if that's what people are thinking when they say it.
yeah, I do. I think that's a overarching norm probably across our country, that when they hear a Southern accent, their IQ level drops a few points, or what they believe to be true. And so, yeah, that's very false in our world. And so it's good for people to not have that. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's a natural lean that when a Southern accent comes on, that knowledge level might be lower, but that could be very, very far from the truth.
Yeah, well, I you could be right. It's definitely not the case for me, and so but I always like pointing it out to see if we can chip away at that stereotype.
I love a good Southern accent, and there are some that are way deeper than mine. So that are from the low Georgia, and kind of even in the Charleston area, that's got a little bit more of a drawl than I do.
Okay, one more accent story, and then we could we could get back to it. But one time I was in South Carolina, and I tried. This was when I was in high school, and I was trying to order something at a Taco Bell, and they could not understand me
On
on
the
the
drive
drive-through
through.
window because I was talking too fast. So I had to go inside and like point to the menu. I was just talking too fast. That
I
was eye-opening for me. I was
Yeah, I
proud
have
of myself.
friends in lower Georgia, and so their accent is more where they'd say Kristen, we need you to go over there, so it's a
Oh, yes, yes.
it's a very deep draw, very deep draw.
I love it. Well,
But
I love the slower speed in general because I think it allows you to get to deeper topics than you do if you're just talking too fast. So we'll see if that comes out at some point. But yeah, maybe before we go into EOS, you could tell us about your journey at Operators Unlimited because I, I I think it's sort of changed over time. Like what did you do when you started there? Like give us the Acumatica side and then how EOS came up and how that impacts your role currently.
yeah, absolutely. So when I got to Operators Unlimited, it's been about, I think around 6 years ago. And I came in as director of administrative operations. And at the time, that had a lot of the office manager roles that our office manager today does. And so, one of the things that was really important for me and kind of the way my brain works is I'm always building and I'm always looking for what else needs to be done. And I'm a driver, so I can't be in one thing very long before I get bored. And so I began to kind of build that role, that director of administrative operations. And um, from there, in that role, is where we were in with QuickBooks. And so we began to say, okay, we've got to have something different. Also, we had no idea that COVID was about to happen, and we were able to went through a really long period of time where we looked at many different ERP systems. There was another guy that was more involved than me at the time. I came in on the back end of it. And so we found Acumatica, felt like it fit our needs best for what we do. And from there, when we put it in place, of course, it's cloud based and almost, oh gosh, it was, let me think. I feel like we went almost into the COVID, you can't be in the office time, and we had just gone cloud based. And if we would have been with QuickBooks at that time, we couldn't have done it. We couldn't have run our business outside of the office.
I didn't remember that about you guys. Wow, good timing on that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, that was not good timing necessarily on us planning well. It was just maybe the Lord's guidance in that. So, but we were thankful. We were thankful for that because then the office staff was able to work from home during that time and use Acumatica. The warehouse had to come in to obviously get our chemicals and products out the doors, but otherwise, it was a wonderful time and flip for us.
And so Acumatica came in right on the heels of QuickBooks, so you weren't really replacing another mid-market ERP. It just kind of maybe growing the business and now needing a mid-market ERP.
Yeah,
And it sounds like you weren't on the front line of that, but you did get pretty involved. I know we worked on some reporting things together. And then that it sounds like you get bored and roll, so you need to keep building.
I do.
How
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more after we kind of got into that. The piece with Acumatica, I became very involved on the back end before we chose Acumatica. And so from there, I kind of began to build the director of operations role and said, okay, hey, we've got to work on HR here in the company. Began to add HR duties and responsibilities on to my role and continued to kind of build that as time went. Our president, he bought Operators Unlimited from the founder's wife in 2015. In 2018, I'm going to do just a little backstory. 2018, he started a leadership team for the first time. He had been running everything solo, really wanted people around him to help lead. So in 2018, he asked me and a few others to be a part of that leadership team. Again, 2020, we brought on Acumatica. And then over the last few couple of years or a year and a half, he asked me to be the vice president and integrator of Operators Unlimited, leading the day to day of our company. And that was just really just from the building of different levels of the organization as time went, since I've been at OU.
No, it's great background, and the Acumatica piece of this, I'm very interested in. I want to dive headfirst into EOS, but right before we do that, I'm very interested in your experience. Did Acumatica come first and then EOS, and how did that happen? And the reason I'm interested is I think the two complement each other. From what I'm learning about EOS, I think the two Acumatica is like a piece of EOS, and you could be all about EOS and then discover Acumatica, and there's tons of synergies. But obviously, I'm more in the Acumatica space. So I'm more interested in the other way around, where you implemented an ERP and then you got involved with EOS, or was EOS sort of driving the implementation of the ERP?
No, Acumatica came first. And one of the biggest things for us is we needed better data. We needed to be able to report on data and be able to just have everything in one system. We had things kind of spread out across different systems. We were doing lots of manual things in our warehouse and in our office functions. And Acumatica kind of helped us bring that together. But then we got to a place where we said, okay, now that we have a little bit more insight into the whole of our company, we've got to bring uniformity to this company. We've got to get everybody on the same page. We've got to focus everybody in one direction. We had core values at the time, but I'm not sure everybody could speak them or say them. I'm not sure that everybody really knew the mission and why we were doing what we were doing. And so that's where EOS popped its head up around. I think we did Acumatica in 2018 or 2019. And I think EOS came about a year later.
And how did that happen? Like, how did you find out about it?
Well, our president Ben, he's so well read and he reads everything that's out. And so he had learned about EOS and he had kind of begun to dabble. And what I mean by that is that he had started to add a few functions into the organization really on his own and seeing I think how it would work for him, and then realize like I think this could be something that could really again bring uniformity to our team, and brought it to the leadership team. And at that point we began to do the research and ultimately got an implementer to help us navigate that, pushing that out to the whole team.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds very similar story to Andrew Kraft, who's CFO at a company that uses Acumatica a couple episodes ago on episode 136. It sounds very similar. He started off dabbling as well, and I think you guys are further along than he is, but it just sort of it almost sounds like nibbling around the edges and trying out a few things, and then it sort of grew from there. And then you said you got an implementer. Maybe tell us about how it went from dabbling to getting more serious about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's expensive. Everything's expensive. And we're a small company, and so we had to ask the question. A lot of companies have to ask, are we going to try to implement it on our own, or are we going to get an implementer to actually help us to do this right? And I think there probably are some people who can be successful doing it on their own, but for us, we knew that an implementer was going to be paramount to this being successful, so that we didn't miss things. And so we had a gentleman, Charlie White, who came in and sat down with us and kind of told us more about EOS and gave us kind of the overarching view of what it could do in the way of unifying our team and being a system that we could run throughout all of the teams within the company, focusing in with our vision and our mission and our core values, and really having a focus on data and issues like I had never experienced before. And so after that, we signed up and really began the track that EOS takes you on in the way of a 2-day annual planning, And then you go through quarterly L10s every year. And so we began to go down that track with the implementer for about a year. And then after a year of that, then we dropped the implementer because we were comfortable enough then to lead well going forward.
So I'm really interested in this, and I'll tell you one reason why. So I recently, went on site with the client for a day. They're here in Ohio, and we just kind of spent the day looking at their Acumatica. They had a bunch of their team in the room, and one of them made an interesting comment afterwards. Like there were a couple times where I might have mentioned something, and it was well received by someone, and they said, well, we've mentioned those same things to that person and they were not receptive to it.
Yes.
and and I think there's this, and I've totally experienced this before in the role of a consultant. There's this interesting phenomenon that happens when you have an outside person because they're outside the politics of the organization. And it's not even necessarily so much the knowledge that they bring, but they sort of become a catalyst for things just because they're not part of the organization. And I'm curious if you find that was a factor for you having an implementer. Was it just the knowledge, or did they help to facilitate conversations that you may not have been able to have on your own?
Yes, Charlie absolutely did that for us because uh, when you're with the same people every day, we were doing really good things, but you're producing similar ideas, right? Unless you're an inventor who creates ideas every moment of every day. So Charlie was able to bring out things to us that either we were not seeing or to dig in and ask questions to get deeper into what we were seeing. And he was able to say some hard things in the room. There are moments of this annual that are really accountability moments between the leadership team. We do like a one thing exercise that I can tell you about if you're interested. But he was able just to say some things in the room that at the time we were not running on EOS, that we were not as accountable to one another. We were not as transparent with one another. And so EOS began to open up and crack these nuts a little bit to be able to see the inside of each other. And so the implementer just was able to pull those things out, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. I mean, I'm sure in any organization, when you're working together, you get to know one another. You can finish each other's sentences, and someone might be saying something new, but you don't even notice it because you think they're saying the same thing. And it sounds like the having that outside EOS implementer consultant is like a breath of fresh air that any organization would need just to bring in someone that they don't know yet. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah, and we were a young leadership team. And so there was still a lot of learning to be had just in leading and leading well. And so having Charlie there to help us navigate that and to understand, I mean, who we are today compared to who we were 6 years ago, um, is unbelievably different in transparency and trust and being able to say what we need to say and do what we need to do, and um, knowing that when you have to say hard things, nobody in the room hates you for it. And that's a part of what EOS has really, really brought, and who we are as a culture um, at Operators Unlimited. It's the heartbeat of who we are, and we've been building that for the last number of years.
So it sounds like EOS has made Operators Unlimited an even better place to work. Has it also, though, impacted the bottom line in a positive way?
Well, yes, and I tell you the way it's done that is it's given one of the things we were struggling with so much is visibility into our numbers. And so part of EOS is data. A big section of EOS is data and its scorecard metrics. And so, but I'll tell you, the scorecard metrics that we came up with the implementer and what they are today are different. And the reason for that is um, we just didn't fully get it at the beginning. And I think there's growth in that, where eventually over the years we were saying, okay, these numbers aren't affecting change. And so one of the things EOS, I don't know if this is all of EOS or just our implementer, but and I think it's something that leaders ought to say to themselves every meeting that they go into, is if you were on a desert island and you were given one sheet of paper from your company with the data on it, that could tell you if your company was being successful or not, what would those data points be? And so we thought we were getting there when we first did EOS, but again, we were learning. We realized they were not helping us make decisions, and so over the last 2 years, we've shifted those scorecard metrics, which actually give us a true picture of the success or failure of our company week to week.
That is really cool to hear. I want to step back for a second and mention EOS kind of broadly. We've talked about it on previous episodes, but there's 6 key components, right?
Yes.
Data is one of those 6, which really jumped out at me being a data person. I'm like, really? It's that important? But then within the 6, I think there's only 2. I think of them as being sheets of paper, but like 6 times 2 things within each of the 6 for 12 things. And I think of them, I'm not all the way through the book, but I think of them as being like 12 total sheets of paper that you run your business on. Is it that simple?
I mean, it really is. When you look at what EOS is, the bottom line is you get down to the vision of who you are and getting everybody on the same page. You get down to the right people in the right seat and keeping them accountable to what they're supposed to be doing. You're looking at the data that you're interested in, what you know you need to achieve to be successful. You're evaluating issues, which is a massive part of EOS, and looking at the process that brings you to really the traction piece of this system. Those are the 6 elements, and yes, it is not difficult. The difficult part is, are you going to be the kind of company that can stick to it or not?
So yeah, it sounds like you're further along, and it's probably because my journey is way earlier on, and I'm more interested in digging into like, well, something specifically on timeline in a minute. But I'm still like, I really like your example about the desert island and the piece of paper. And so, to be fair, EOS does not call them pieces of paper. I sort of think of them like 12 pieces of paper, and maybe some of them are multi-page, but for sure the KPI one is like 1 page, right? And the reason why I like think of them as piece of papers, I think EOS calls them tools, not pieces of paper, but I like thinking of it that way because you're limited. And we live in
Right.
a world where unlimited has been just sort of, we've been brainwashed with this cell phone plan unlimited and whatever unlimited, and you're limited. We're in time and space. You have limited resources, and do you find that maybe that's why it took some iterations to get your metrics down, because you had to you had to force yourself to only think of a few. You couldn't just go on and on and on. I would need this and that and the other. Maybe you could tell us about that metric exercise, and
Yeah.
was that an
Yeah,
important
because at the
piece of it?
beginning we thought we needed everything measured. So I think we had, oh my stars, 15 to 20 measurements, and I couldn't even tell you all of them at the moment. But and then what we realized over time is that we were seeing them populate, but they just weren't making us change anything. And then we realized these are not the right metrics, because metrics should affect change. And one of the things EOS says is if you're off track for more than 2 weeks, that needs to be dropped down to an issue and you need to address that. And to do should come off of that. Everything should produce action, so that things don't stay the same or stay stagnant. And so that led really to the place where we are today, where we said, okay, now we have a set of probably 5 to 7 um, data points and metrics where we go, okay, that we know if we're being successful here. And if we're in the red, then change has to happen for not only the success of the leadership team individually, but also the success of the company as a whole.
That is fascinating that you got it down to 5 to 7 metrics. And wow, I'm still digesting that. um, I think what's fascinating to me about that is it seems to be kind of one of the characteristics of EOS. It's very simple. The end result is simple, but the process is not, right? I've got 4 quotes that I have up on my wall, 4 quotes that I really like, and one of them is from Dwight D. Eisenhower, where he says, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." And of course,
Yes.
he orchestrated the D-Day invasion, arguably the most complicated project management endeavor of the 20th century. And if you look at D-Day, they didn't even invade the day that they thought they were going to. So plans are worthless, but the process is everything. And in this case, it sounds like you landed on the 5 to 7 eventually. So the output was not worthless, but it's maybe talk more about the process of getting there. Do you feel like was it easy? Maybe I'll just start with that.
No, and I look just to clarify. So we're around 9 now. Maybe we were closer to 20 and we've come down to 9, but we've cut it about in half because I wanted to make sure I tell you the truthful amount of metrics. But no, and to be honest, it was not some magic day, right, in the leadership team where we said, oh, we've got to make changes. It was this organic thing that happened over time where we just began to realize that the data that we were looking at week after week was not doing anything for us. It was making us aware of some things, but it was not affecting the growth of the company. And so I think it was more organic. And as we as a leadership were growing, we were becoming more knowledgeable in all the things that we needed to do in the business to make change. And at the same time, we were looking at the metrics saying, I don't think this matches anymore to where we want to go. And so it just rearranged our thoughts to get to where we are today and focusing on the main things.
That makes sense. And as you're describing it, I'd be shocked if anyone lands on their metrics right away. It seems like it's just necessary that there'd be a process to it.
Yeah, I can't imagine that many companies are going to land on their perfect scorecard their very first time. I would be surprised if even they have it in the first maybe year to year and a half. For us, number one, you're changing everything about what you've probably done in your company. Think about it this way. I mean, I lived in a world before Operators Unlimited where you had meetings every week and it truly was the death by meetings, right? You go in and everybody shares everything that's on their heart and soul, and nobody writes a to do and nobody gets anything done. And then they leave, and the next week they come back and they do the exact same thing, and it's this process where nothing gets done. Now all of a sudden EOS brings about this mindset where, hey, when you're in meetings, it is very structured to the point that you rate your meeting at the end of how you followed the EOS process. And when you spew all the things that you have in your heart and soul now, somebody's going to dig deep and say, okay, what's the true issue here? Let's get down to the heart of the matter and let's put some action behind it. It's no longer just a crying time. This is a to do time. So it really changes the action of your company. And I am a big person on accountability and I'm a big driver. So anything that can push our company towards action is going to be the place where I want to live and stay. And so that's the thing that I think has been so impactful to see the change of companies that they have to do. So scorecard's going to be a piece of it. Getting your team into the rhythm of what EOS is takes time. And so as all of that meshes together, then there's a reality. Oh, maybe our metrics aren't exactly right now that we're in this system that is making us think better and be more actionable and be more accountable. Maybe we need to come up with some metrics that actually are going to affect change where they haven't before.
And to me, that is all good news. Whether we're talking about you start off sort of self implementing a few things and then eventually you bring in an implementer, or whether we're talking about the scorecard that starts off with 20 metrics and you pare it down to 9, no matter what it is, it sounds like don't be afraid to jump in. Just go for it. And then you'll just keep moving and you'll get better and better over time. Is that a good synopsis there of what you've experienced?
Absolutely. I think you've got to get your feet wet. And then after that, then you'll, as you're growing in the system, you will begin to kind of identify what's best as time goes. And I think that's exactly what's happened with us.
Talk to me how it felt for you personally. What was it kind of like exercise where, exercise is maybe hard to get momentum on and there's some pain involved, but overall it's like makes you feel better? Or is there a better analogy for how you personally have experienced EOS?
Yeah. So again, for me, I love accountability and I love action. So let me say this. So this type of structure and accountability and action is just my heartbeat. So I loved that part. I'll tell you the part that was the most difficult, and I'll be honest, I don't think we've arrived yet in it, is the issues time, because everything at the beginning of the meeting is very fast. It's on track, off track. You don't speak anything but on track, off track as you're getting through, except for in some headlines and some things like that. You push everything to an issues time where you spend the majority of your time in speaking. And what that is it's called identify, discuss, and solve, IDS. And so a lot of times issues are brought up, and it's like if somebody's had an issue, if I've had an issue with you, Tim, and I say, well, I'd love for all the communication to get better between, um, you know, and you give this broad, your department and my department, but what IDS does, it says, well, tell me more about that. What are you finding? Well, they tell a little bit more, and eventually you're asking almost those 7 why questions to get to the point that says, Tim didn't communicate with me in the last meeting well. And so eventually you're like, oh, now that's the issue we can solve, right? Not this broad stroke of passive aggressiveness. Hey, let's get down to the heart of the matter. And so that's what IDS, that's been the hardest piece, is because you're trying to peel back onions of people's issues to really get to the heart of it. And so and then you're taking action on that, because you don't want to start taking action on something broad and it never really hit the heart of the matter. Does that make sense?
It does. And yeah, I haven't got to that part of the book, but I love that. Yeah, it sounds like the peeling back the layers of the onion. There's a lot of layers, there's a lot of tiers, but then when you finally land on it, that part has to be a good feeling. Is that part you like, or it's
I
the
I
process
love,
getting there that you don't like?
it's the process of getting there. And because what I would love is for somebody just to come in and say, Tim didn't communicate with me in the meeting. That's how I that's how I live and breathe, Tim, and how our leadership team lives and breathe in transparency today. But our team, it still has to work on that, right? And so I want people to be able to come in and be so willing to just say their piece of what is the true issue. But having to peel the layers back to get to the issue sometimes is hard, and it takes time. and it doesn't move as fast as I'd like to. And then sometimes I think we don't go through the steps that we need to actually get to the heart. We just start putting an action towards the broad stroke issue, and sometimes I think we miss the mark.
And so that's where you feel like you guys are still learning in that area, how to spend less time peeling back the layers and just people being more comfortable coming with the what the thing is initially.
Yeah, and so that's the part that was probably the hardest personally for me, is really us getting to that place, and we've gotten so much better. It's been so wonderful. We just have a wonderful team, Tim. I mean, that, and so they have just, it's taken a while, but they have grabbed hold of EOS, and they're getting better at this, but there's still so much growth for us to, EOS says if you're at 100%, you're at euphoria, I think is what they say. And if you're at 80% and getting and meeting your rocks and all of that, that's really good. That's what EOS considers really good. And so I'd say we're probably somewhere between the 70 to 80 in the way of really doing EOS like really, really well.
Euphoria is an interesting word to use there. I mean, obviously on the extreme end, but it's a very emotional word, and I can almost hear it in your voice that it is. It sounds like it is a good feeling the more you're running on the thing for you
Yeah,
personally.
absolutely. I mean, and the more granular we get with it to where we're hitting the what EOS intended, even in like the issues. And I think issues I just come back to because I just don't think we're quite there yet. But if we can get our people and the leadership too at times for all of us to get into the ability to really just say the issue that's burning them up inside, boy, we can make quicker action, and we can make their lives better. I tell so many of my team, I'm like, I don't ever want you to have burdened shoulders. Please don't ever have burdened shoulders. Like, there is no need for it. And so release that. And I think the way to do that is just saying what you need to say. And so for me, when we get to the point where we hit that IDS um, to the level that EOS really wants you to, boy, that will be massive for us.
And do you think for most, so I'm not even talking about Operators Unlimited, but what's your gut feel on most people? There's no way you're in a position to really answer this, but I'm going to ask you anyways.
Okay.
Like, one thing I'm thinking here is, I wonder if most people, myself included, come into a meeting and passively aggressively, you know, mention something like the communication is not great between our departments because they themselves haven't peeled the onion back and they don't really know what the core thing is. They're just they can sort of feel something, as opposed to, exactly what it is and you're afraid to say it. What's your gut feel like? Which extreme, or what do you think the average person is more? They just don't really know what it is, or they just don't want to say it.
I think it's both and. I think probably half the time they know it and they're just not willing to say it because it's hard to say hard things. And I think probably 50% of the time they need somebody to help them get there. So I think you're right in that it's probably 50-50, but 50% of the time they know exactly the reason why they're saying what they're saying.
So you can definitely get that part addressed, right? So you don't have to take so much time when someone really knows, but then you still need, maybe it's not in the meeting, but you need some mechanism where where people need other people's help to draw out what the specific things are.
Right. And just to give you a little bit of glimpse more into our culture, I mean, we even put out a trust document this past year because we so want everybody to say their piece, and to say, man, be transparent, tell us what you want, even if it's hard. It at least allows us to be able to talk and communicate. And so um, to be honest, I would say I would put our culture, and maybe I've maybe I'm saying this very big headedly, but I would put our culture above a large amount of companies in our world today. And I would say the majority of cultures in corporate America um, don't want their teams to be as transparent.
Yeah, to me, when you say the phrase corporate culture, that's to me, it means there is no transparency. That's what corporate culture means to me. It's politics, not transparency.
That's right, and
Um,
we don't want that at Operators Unlimited. No politics there.
well, tell me about the team then. So there's one particular thing I'm curious about. I'm not all the way through the book, but I did spend a good amount of attention to the chapter on data because that's kind of my thing. And one thing that stood out to me in there, I'm probably not going to get the phrase right, but it was something like if you put a metric on someone where someone has one number that they know they're supposed to care about, and he gives an example, even the receptionist answering the phone at a company has a number. It's two, and
Yeah,
that number means the phone should not ring more than twice. Two rings good, three rings bad. And so, the idea is that everyone has a number that they personally are accountable to. And he makes the point, and there's something about like if someone I'm going to botch the language here, but if someone like is really up for that job, they're going to appreciate that. Whereas if someone is not up for that job, they're not going to appreciate being measured on a number. And so where I'm going with this back to your team is it then you then start to realize, well, maybe we don't have all the right people. And so in your since you're like further on in this EOS journey, I'm curious with your experience, how much of it sounds like you've gotten at a pretty good place. You still have work to do, etc., but you've gotten at a pretty good place, and you talk kind of affectionately about your team there. And so getting to my question, how much of your team stayed intact? Like how much you were able to take the existing team and all go into EOS together, or how much attrition was there where like, you realize some people just needed to go find another job?
um, that's a great question. We did have some attrition.
Was it less than 10%?
Yes, less than 10%. Um, I think some of that just naturally came, but yeah, I mean, there were times where there were things that I told you about the one thing exercise that we do in leadership, and there's hard conversations that are had in those kind of discussions that lead to attrition over time, and because trust erodes, and um, it's interesting, but you come back to that one number. I would say to you today that most, I would say 70% of our team has a scorecard number. But we have a number of people on our team that work, all the way from first, second, and third shifts who can't be in these L10 meetings. They don't have a number. They have accountabilities to their leader, but they don't necessarily have the EOS number on a scorecard. So I think you mentioned the number, that came back to that piece, and then of course I think there was attrition. I think there was some attrition in the midst of the growth of EOS, but I don't know that it was not all of it naturally attached to EOS.
So let's put the attrition at less than 10%, and we're not even going to blame all that attrition on the EOS. And so what I hear there is it wasn't this huge major upheaval, right?
No.
And I think that, and here's where I think there's definitely a huge, I don't know how to really utter it, but there's a huge similarity between implementing an ERP like Acumatica and EOS, in the sense that when people go into an ERP implementation, they're terrified about losing their jobs a lot of times because light is going to get shown on all these different areas. And I would think it's similar with EOS. But you went through that as an organization, and the reality was less than 10% attrition. So that fear that someone has when you're going to really start being transparent, oh, they're going to know what I really do around here. It actually doesn't mean you're on your way out the door, right? So you don't have to fear the process. Similar with an ERP implementation, I find that the more you embrace the implementation, the better off you are in that organization for the long run. And I think you're a perfect example of that. Like, you were involved in the Acumatica side, and that has led to further growth for you in the organization. But I think there's a natural fear that we all have as human beings, that they're going to find out that I'm really not a good fit for this or something like that. But at least in your situation, it sounds like that was not the case. It didn't result in firing half the company and bringing in a new half, right, to make the EOS journey. You all made that journey and grew together, it sounds like.
Yeah, we really did. And when I even think back, Tim, honestly, there was probably less than, it takes me a minute to ponder, but it probably was less than 5% to 3% even. I mean, it was, so I would say to people who are considering it, um, trust me, if that attrition needs to happen, you already know that. And this will just help you get there.
And I also really like a story from the book. So the book we're talking about is called Traction. That's the same book you're talking about, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, just making sure, because there's a few on the website, but Traction's like your main starter one, and I'll put a link to the Traction book on this episode 138. But I like one of the stories in there, and one thing I really like about the this book is that it's maybe less than half quotes from management gurus and more than half stories from actual EOS clients, and I love that real world examples that come out just get woven through the book. And one of the examples is of a company that, when they were a startup, they had a someone who was working there who was just like awesome for the business. And then as they grew and became larger, that person just didn't fit well in the larger organization. They were miserable. The organization could tell, like you're saying, they already knew things weren't going well. And eventually the EOS process just sort of brought that to the top. And that person then went and found another job. And the thing was, it was better for the business, but then that person was happier because they've just become miserable in what, I don't know what the details were, but I thought it was interesting that they were a good fit for the organization when they were smaller. So it wasn't a problem with the person. It was just they weren't a good fit for the organization anymore. And then they went and found a job that was a better fit for them. And so even the attrition side is not like there's something wrong with you. It's just that maybe you're not a good fit for this particular place at this particular time. And you go find something else and you're happier. And then it's also better for the business. And I like that angle where it's not just like, well, sorry, you're just not cutting it anymore. But maybe you just need to find something else that will be a better fit for you.
I mean, that story is almost an identical one to ours. I mean, almost identical. So the same kind of thing. It's just honestly just a getting to a place where the company is outgrowing the person, and everybody's got to go and be in their zone of genius. And if being in the company that they're in is not it, and the company's outgrown the person, or the person's outgrown the company, either way, they've got to just go find their zone of genius and be happy. And exactly what occurred with us too, with even with the EOS process and things that came out through that, and attrition that happened, and people that are now in places where they should be, that is not with us anymore, but they're in a place where they're happy and satisfied, and are in their zone of genius. And that's how things are supposed to work.
And so I'll press you on that. Do you really believe that um, well, not what you said, but do you believe the following, that every person really does have a zone of genius, and if they're not a good fit for your organization, it doesn't make them a bad person? Because I feel like, before you answer, I feel like a lot of times the the impression we get is it's like, oh yeah, maybe you're not a good fit for our organization. And what the person hears is, so you're saying I'm a better fit for like a mental institution organization, like a lesser organization? Do you really believe that every person does have a zone of genius, and that even though they might not be a good fit for Operators Unlimited, that doesn't make them lesser of a person?
I absolutely believe that. And if you don't mind me saying this, Tim, I'm a strong believer in Jesus Christ, and I and a part of what I believe in about people is that every person has a purpose on this earth, and that He's created them for a purpose. And I believe that each of them have talents and skills that have been given to them, and I believe there is a zone of genius and a place for them to be where they can be the most happy and successful. So I believe that from a lot of different elements, not just business, but in a spiritual realm of what I believe. Personally, I believe that every person has just a greater impact to be made in this world, whether it's at our company or somewhere else. They have a place and they have a zone of genius. They've just got to connect up.
Well, I don't mind you saying that because I believe the same thing personally. And I know that in the world of business, we all have different viewpoints, right? And that's okay.
Yep.
But no, I'm very much in line with you on that. And I think, just looking at it from a non Jesus Christ perspective, there's a huge mental health challenge, especially, at least I know for sure, in the United States. I'm sure uh, in the entire world, and especially post COVID, and especially with more digital um, worlds that we live in. And I think that one thing that I feel comes from that is there's just with these mental health challenges, it's this feeling that I'm not a good fit somewhere, right? And that's one thing. Reading that book, it has been helpful for me to believe that more myself, because I think you say it with more conviction because you're like doing EOS in the real world. But I'm still like, about myself, even it's like, oh dude, am I really, can I really, am I really as important, that important, or even have the value? But I'm struggling here to say this, but I really am believing that more and more, that it's not a problem with you, it's not a problem with the organization. You find something else, and maybe you don't even make as much money, right? But you'd be
Right.
happier, and it's not like a pat on the head happier, like, oh, that's good for you, but that you really do. Everyone does have value in the world, and if you're miserable in your job, maybe it's just not the right fit for you, and it's not just for you because you're a lesser person. Like, the world would be a better place if you had a better role, something like that. And so,
It,
yeah, you're way ahead of me in that. And I'm just even struggling to say it right, but I'm sort of like learning that myself. And that's one thing that I've picked up just from this little simple business EOS thing. And I think it's pretty cool.
well, and I'll tell you too, one of the things that we even talk about at OU is that that same kind of thing. There is something even deeper about each person that at our company, where we ask the question, do you even know your purpose? Do you know your purpose of why you're here and what you want to do? And we're going through these large interviews, just so you know, of caring team interviews, of finding more of what people believe and want in life, and what makes them tick. And just as a company, we're trying to hone in on truly what it is that makes that person um, be in that space of mental health and happiness. And we say it's a physical journey, a mental journey, and a faith journey, and we want to help them in whatever step they want to take, and whichever one of those they want to take. And a piece of that, honestly, could lead them to a place where they say, "Wait a minute, oh, you might not be the place for me. I am not, I really want to be doing blank." And we would say, man, we would hate to lose you, but if that's your zone of genius, and that's your space of mental health, and that's your place where you find purpose, that's exactly where you should be.
Wow. There's that really shows your conviction right there, and that you really believe that. I love it. You almost,
Absolutely.
I do have to check you on that. And by the way, quick time check. Are you good for another 10 minutes or so?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah, I'm
perfect. Thank
good.
you. Um, I want to I want to just make sure you sound like you're making Operators Unlimited sound like a nonprofit. It is a for-profit company, and EOS
Yes.
has had a positive impact on the bottom line. I want to verify that again. Is that
Yes,
right?
it has. It absolutely has. We are a
So
profitable
this
company.
so this isn't all just a bunch of touchy-feely, make a perfect work environment stuff. Like, doing this has actually made Operators Unlimited more profitable.
It absolutely has. And I mean, let me just say real quick, if I can put a plug in for Operators Unlimited, Tim, you know, we really provide kind of a comprehensive approach to industrial wastewater. So you hear touchy feely, and then I say wastewater, right?
Yeah.
And
What is that? Hey, yeah,
right.
tell us. Let me drag you back to the business side. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so what that means is a lot of manufacturing facilities, kind of who make widgets, they produce wastewater. And so that wastewater has to be pre-treated before it can be discharged to a municipality. And so that discharged water is regulated by a permit that has to be met. And so OU comes in and helps them with chemical optimization and wastewater operation staffing, engineering, design, build. We can design and build your wastewater plant. We do compliance and regulation, and we do education and training in the wastewater operations world. In that space, that wastewater operations operator staffing training. And so we go in and help the industrial wastewater side of things. We help them to pre-treat their water and make sure they're meeting their discharge permit, so they're not getting fined, and they are helping our environment to be the best it can be. So that's what we do, so that through EOS, uh, kind of what our day in and day out of the metrics we're looking at is based on industrial wastewater.
So we're just adjusting all sorts of stereotypes on this episode. I mean, we've addressed the whole accent thing,
Right.
and now, just because you're a Southern Jesus Christ loving person doesn't mean that you necessarily vote a certain way politically, and you don't care about the environment, and you're all about big corporate America. I just love this these stereotype adjusting type of things. This is great.
That's right. That's what we're here for.
So yeah, but I think it's cool that a lot of times it seems like you have to choose one or the other. It's like, all right, either we're going to be profitable or we're going to have a good work culture. And it sounds like maybe the two are related. Maybe if you build a better culture like you've been doing, put it in that work, better transparency, etc., it actually leads to more profitability, and your actual proof of that.
We always have to remember too that, and we've had to talk through this. There's a balance. Like you winning and caring can be equal. You don't have to do one over the other. And so winning and caring can be equal. And so we want to win and we want to care, and we want to transform the lives of people. That's our mission. We want our one word mission is transformation. We want to transform dirty water to cleanish water that's discharged, and we want to transform the lives of people. And part of that winning comes in the caring, and it comes in revenue numbers being high and profit growing, and us being able to do more as time goes. We're not where we want to be. I'll tell you that, but we're better this year than we were last year, and we continue to get better each year. And so that's our plan.
As you describe that, what I hear is my accounting background comes up, and what I hear there is you either invest in just getting more revenue, which is only for a certain period. It only is this quarter, this year, whatever, or you also invest in your balance sheet. And so maybe you do have to make a choice on a case by case basis. Am I just going to go for the short term revenue gain, or am I going to invest in the organizational asset that over the long run will produce more revenue? But it is an upfront investment in a sense, right? I mean, you
Yeah,
had to
that's
bring
right.
in the EOS implementer, you had to internally take time as a team to work on these things. So you were not making as much revenue, while you were focused on that. but if you have the long view, you are more profitable in the long run. Is that a good accounting way of looking at it?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest. If we didn't have EOS, I think we would be doing good things, but I don't think we'd be doing great things because it has so focused us in on what we're about and who we are and how we're supposed to be living week to week to week in the way of our rocks, our goals, what EOS calls them rocks, our 90-day rocks, our scorecard metrics, our to dos that are weekly, and then our issues. It's just, I just don't think we would be where we are today without it.
That's really cool. Yeah, I didn't realize until we've hit record on this that you're a lot farther along in the EOS journey than I realized. It's really cool to hear. Since I'm still learning about this myself, I'm earlier on. Andrew a couple episodes ago is earlier on than you guys, but it's really cool to hear what it feels like. When you've been on this journey for longer, and yeah, it's really inspiring. It's really neat. But one thing I did want to ask you a little bit ago, but just remembering it now, coming back to like more where I'm at, or where again, I think there's a lot of similarities between Acumatica and EOS. Is that I think that a lot of companies implement a new ERP like Acumatica, right?
Hmm.
And they believe the lie that the publisher, Acumatica in this case, tells them, which is a total lie. And the lie is, if you implement our system, you will just automatically and magically have best practices in your organization. And they think that the software itself will just make them a better company, which is a total lie. And that's where I think EOS is just so complementary, because once you've gone through the Acumatic implementation process, and yeah, maybe you've got better software now, but it didn't do what you thought it would do for your business. Now you're in a great position to go look at something like EOS. And so bringing it back to maybe someone who's in that position, maybe you implemented Acumatica in the last couple of years and you realize, this isn't just magically what I thought it would be. Take us back to those first 1 to 2 years for you in EOS. What did that cadence look like, and what did that time investment look like? You mentioned some quarterly things. You mentioned you now do an annual meeting, but see if you can take yourself back to the weeds of it when you were with the EOS implementer. What type of investment was that like? Because when you're doing something like Acumatica, it's like taking on a second job, a second
Right.
full-time job. Was it a similar experience? Or maybe you could walk us through what that cadence of time investment looked like for you.
Yeah, no, it was nothing like Acumatica.
I think that's all you need to say. That's good news. That's good news. So I don't need
No,
to go through another Acumatica implementation to do EOS.
no, it was not Acumatica. It was, it's funny when I can't even go back. That it wasn't. I don't feel like it was wasn't terribly painful. I think the biggest pain points was actually going through the first annual, where we're just verifying is our what we have known as our mission and our vision and our core values, and really digging into who is OU. That was probably the hardest thing, just doing the really introspective uh, bit of looking at the company, that the implementer took us through this. I always call consultants take you through the tunnel of chaos. I just don't. Sometimes they don't bring you out of it. they
because they make more money if they keep you
Right.
in there as long as possible.
And so I think that place of the tunnel of chaos of just the 2-day annual and the prep of getting there was probably the hardest piece. But we use a software, so I always want to make sure people know EOS is not a software. EOS is a system, but we use a software called 90 to that runs EOS for us, so that our teams, our L10 meetings and all of that run through this system, so it's easy to navigate and all of our data is in it. And That's what we look at week in and week out. And so once that got populated, it really, I just don't feel like it was a burden.
Yeah, so EOS you can just run on pieces of paper, but then yeah, you could do the digital version as well. But the real value is just the thoughts, right? It's not the
Yeah,
software itself. The software maybe makes it logistically easier to keep track of stuff, but the big ahas are not the software, right?
right. You can create this in Excel if you want to and have tabs that you go to every
Sure,
week and
sure.
run it. No, it's the data that you put in it and the thought and that your vision traction of making sure you know what everybody's focused on and what we're doing day in and day out. That's what matters.
So yeah, it sounds like it maybe is harder work, like more introspective, more like reflective, and like maybe more intense work in a sense, but it's not as much time investment as the Acumatica implementation was. Maybe even sounds like significantly less time investment.
Significantly less.
And so
Yes.
I think that translates then to less financial investment as well. And where I'm going with this is, so well, let me just verify. I would assume you spent more money implementing Acumatica than you have implementing EOS. Is that true?
Yes.
Then which one, and be honest, which one has been had a bigger impact on your bottom line, your Acumatica implementation or your EOS implementation?
Oh wow. That's a great question.
Oh, I thought it was going to be a slam dunk answer.
Well,
Interesting.
it is in that I would say overall EOS. I lean EOS, but we couldn't we couldn't have the metrics that we have for EOS without Acumatica.
Oh,
Now
interesting.
I have
Okay.
I have some issues with Acumatica, right? The EOS is kind of brought out once you start to know more. So Acumatica helped us to actually be able to see basic data reporting that we didn't have as clearly in QuickBooks, right? So that helps us to have that data that we can pull out and then put into our scorecard metrics, and we can understand where we are and lead the company. We see everything in one place in EOS. Um, Now, the kicker is then EOS, you begin to get better at looking at data and you say, okay, now I need blank. And you go back over to Acumatica and then they can't do it. Or that it's like an archaic reporting system that can't produce the dashboards you need. So that's super frustrating for me. So I think it's been a beautiful friendship of sort between Acumatica and EOS, but sometimes EOS gives me more in the friendship than Acumatica.
But so that's the answer I was expecting. I was expecting like, but yeah, hands down, EOS had a bigger impact on the bottom line. But it's very interesting to me that you struggled a little bit to answer it. And I don't know if it's because you're on an Acumatica podcast, but but you are answering what I was expecting. Like EOS had a bigger impact, and so where I'm going with this is it's less investment for bigger impact.
Oh yeah, yes, but for us, the reason I struggled is because we didn't have a way to really pull out our numbers as clearly and successfully that Acumatica now at least gives us that. So I think that's the place that that we had to have Acumatica. Um, I believe we had to have Acumatica first before we could do EOS, or at least
Interesting.
some sort
Wow.
of system that gave
Yeah.
us clarity as a smaller company. We needed something to help us be able to report better. And so now we're able to
Interesting.
put all those numbers in EOS and see everything in one place. And it's very, very illuminating.
Well, thank you for that insight. I mean, I've been involved with Acumatica for over 10 years and EOS for a few months. So EOS is the new shiny object. So thank you for bringing me back down to appreciating both.
Yes, that's
but, I,
right.
but I think what's good news is that obviously the audience for this podcast is Acumatica people. And what's good news is, look, you did the hard part already. And now maybe look at something like EOS where you can actually get more out of the investment, but you're now standing on a foundation technology wise that will allow you to pull it off. And so that's to me just all good news for someone who's running on Acumatica, knows nothing about EOS or struggling at all with running their business. sounds like take a look at EOS, right? It's been
Yeah,
good for your organization at least.
it absolutely has. I'm grateful we have it, and I don't see us veering away from it at any point in the future.
Well, Brooke, thank you for taking the time today and for going over. I really enjoyed the conversation, and love to have you back on at some point to talk about when I get a little bit closer to you. Would love to have a conversation about what it's like as I sure you continue to. It doesn't sound to me like a fixed thing where you arrived. It sounds like it's running a business is like a living, breathing thing. You're always challenges and things, and what it's more like. Is EOS still working for you years later, et cetera? I'd love to have you back on, but thank you so much for your time today and talking about it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of ogforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening and take care.